Hey everyone, my name is Isha, and welcome to episode 7 of the Texas Blockchain podcast. And today we have joining us is Greg from Akash Network. And let's get started with a brief introduction about yourself, and then also maybe some time leading up to Akash.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Greg Osuri. I'm the CEO founder for Overclock Labs. Overclock Labs is the creator of Akash Network, and being a programmer all my life. Prior to Akash, I founded a company called Angel Hack. Angel Hack is the largest hackathon-based accelerator in the world. At peak, we had 150,000 developers in about 50 cities. And that's where I got to interact with enormous amounts of developers, and a common theme in terms of problems amongst these developers happened to be cloud deployment, just getting your applications available to your users in a scalable manner. That led me to essentially starting Akash, and I wrote the first line of code for Akash about 10 years ago.
That's amazing. Can you tell us maybe a brief introduction about Akash, and then just some things that you're looking forward to recently, and yeah.
So Akash is what we like to call a super cloud. In fact, it is the worst. Apologies. In fact, it is the world's first super cloud. The idea for a super cloud really, I think, came formulated by Cornell University in 2015. But the idea is very simple. You have private clouds, public clouds, and public clouds tend to lock you in. Right? Once you're on a public cloud, it becomes very expensive to get off a public cloud, and that creates a whole lot of challenges, mostly when it comes to costs, right? So, and then you have private clouds that don't normally scale like a public cloud. So, but private clouds give you sovereignty and you have a lot of control. So, what if there's a way to bridge a private cloud and a public cloud, and create a layer that is decoupled from any single cloud provider? That way, the control plane lives in the user's control, and the resource plane lives on the cloud provider. So the idea of a super cloud is to, like the word describes, super means a superset, essentially. A superset of different cloud providers was a concept, and Akash was the first sort of realization of the concept. We began researching on the idea in 2015 timeframe. We wrote a paper in 2017, published a paper that got enormous notoriety amongst both industry as well as academia. We built the first implementation in 2019, and we launched the mainnet in 2020. So it's been a long journey to make super cloud a reality. And in addition, we added to the original concept of the super cloud is the decentralization and permissionlessness, because the very idea of a super cloud is freedom from a single provider or a single vendor, right? What better way to express the freedom than to actually create a structure that cannot be exploited by a single company.
Okay.
So, and if you think about it, we all pay the cloud tax with or without knowing. Mm-hmm. Half of every dollar we spend on online services goes to a cloud provider. So be it on Netflix, be it on Asana, be it on Twitter, as a matter of fact, right? Look at any S1 filings of companies, you'll notice a big cost item for these companies happen to be the cloud bill. So we essentially pay a tax to this unelected layer of society, which essentially holds us together. Without cloud, there is no modern society, right? And everything runs on the cloud. If the cloud goes down, I don't get my Uber Eats, essentially, right? It's so essential to our society that we all pay a tax to, and we don't know what's there, who holds the keys to this big gigantic kingdom. And we saw what happened recently with let's say ChatGPT, right? We saw 5 unknown members of the board that no one heard of control the most powerful AI for 3 days.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of opacity we have with the cloud, and we need to essentially open source that and decentralize that to
Right.
have any sense of sovereignty as a society. That's really what Akash brings to the table. It is the first decentralized open cloud. We shipped the first version in 2020. It was a very basic version. It was essentially Linux containers running in a decentralized manner with self-custody. It was the first time you could see self-custody for a cloud. Until then, the de facto usage of the cloud was, custodial, in fact, login and password by some one individual company. Mm-hmm. And from there, we added features. And every time we added a major feature, it was about addressing a need in the market, right? So initially, the self-custody was very attractive to a lot of decentralized applications because it aligns with the values of a decentralized application, like be it osmosis, be it a decentralized exchange with a front end that needs to have absolute censorship resistance or permissionless access or whatnot. It appealed to greater Cosmos ecosystem. In fact, about 40% of Cosmos ecosystem was running on Akash. Akash being the first Cosmos chain for get into that later if you want, but it was very closer to the ecosystem. That's why we were able to attract a lot of Cosmos chains. And then as we added features, be it discovery, be it storage, whatnot, we added more use cases and expanded on the types of users that would use Akash. Yeah. And with the latest upgrade, which happened to be GPUs, we've been working on that for about 3 years. We wrote a white paper in 2017 talking about what a primary use case for Akash is machine learning. Yeah. And people didn't pay attention. We talked about GPU shortage. We talked about how cloud is essentially being a gatekeeper will lead to problems when it comes to resource allocation. Right. Back then, it wasn't very obvious because resource allocation, if you translate another way, is just cost, right? So the higher you pay, the higher priority you get in the list to get access to resources. Yeah. And it's very obvious when it comes to GPUs, right? So if you're a startup company trying to get GPUs, or any company, you have to know somebody in Amazon. Okay. You can't not get on-demand GPUs, right? Mm-hmm. If you go to Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, any of them, I'm talking about high-density GPUs, be it A100s or H100s. Yeah. Cheaper ones, maybe you can, but the real ones that you actually need to do AI is impossible to get, right? So only place right now really is Akash. Even Akash is running out, but fortunately we are able to tap into places where Amazon and Google couldn't go, thanks to decentralization. So as we hit resource limits, we're able to attract quite a lot of supply onto Akash, and it's an incredible demand-supply curve that's being balanced very well on chain.
Awesome. And so I guess like the decentralized aspect of this network, right? Like, is that something that was kind of like the basis of this mission, or something you discovered along the way, like after you started over Cloud Labs?
Good question. So it was initially we in 2013 when we started working on this system, it was not decentralized. It was very permission, very centralized. As a matter of fact, the original idea was to create in 2013. When I was working with a lot of developers trying to solve this deployment problem, we discovered a technology called Linux containers. It was very attractive because it would solve the parity problem, in the sense you could package a container in one machine and ship the container to another machine, and that other machine would have the same exact software. It seems very obvious now, but in 2013, mutability of deployments was a big problem. The chances of you getting a deployment right was very low. Okay, right?
It's like paying for one thing and getting...
No, not paying for one thing. It's like you have dependencies when you have software, right? When you deploy something, you have packages. You have packages you need to run the software. Operating systems, different packages, also different dependencies. Modern software is essentially orchestration of dependencies. Right. That's what it is. The likeliness of the remote server having the same exact packages that your local has is very low. Okay. And every time you update, packages change. So how do you replace an old package and with a newer package? And there's again sub dependencies. So it goes into a dependency tree, right? So how do you ensure there's the tree that has the integrity that you need for your application, right? Mutable deployments are extremely problematic. Like I used to do DevOps, and for a company that was doing 1 billion transactions a day, and at that scale, at hundreds of servers, and that to consider now exact configuration across hundreds, if not thousands of servers
Yeah.
at scale, right? So each deployment was taking at least 24 hours to sit there and make sure you could get it right. It's just not git push and go happy. And they usually happen to happen on Friday.
Mhm.
Why not, right? So sit in the office Friday evening. By the time you're done, you're like Saturday night. So that it was scaling is very difficult.
Okay.
I mean, you can deploy a simple application on Heroku, now Vercel, I guess, but Heroku was the primary tool back then. But scaling at scale to 1 billion transactions is very, very challenging. Right?
Okay.
So containers came and said, well, look, you can package and you can get the same exact package. You can package the software here with all the dependencies,
Mhm.
push the container to the server, and you get. That's why Docker became very popular.
Mhm.
So I was working on a version before Docker called LXC, and we discovered Kubernetes. Kubernetes, no one heard of Kubernetes. This is 2013, 14. I fell in love with it because I was working on a different. So containers are great, but it didn't have fault tolerance and scheduling or orchestration. So everyone was working on orchestrator at that point. Like, it was container tooling. Like you see, like layer 1 fight now, like it was container fight. There's always every time there's technology, there's a lot of different experiments. And I picked Kubernetes as my horse, right? We had Mesos, we had a lot of other orchestration systems, and the reason why I picked that was I was working on an optimistic scheduler based on Omega paper published by Google, and Google also had this incredible scheduler called Borg, right? So that's why they were able to get Google scale economy, right? And what they did was they took Borg and implemented Kubernetes. Borg was based on an old design they had that worked for 15 years, so they knew it would work. And my scheduler was much more powerful, but I liked Kubernetes because it had a orchestrator that most schedulers didn't. So I fell in love with it, but I stopped working on my Omega and started working on Kubernetes. I made some contributions to Kubernetes that's still very actively used. If you use Helm, if you use AWS CLI, you still use my code. I've written a library that's still very actively used by a lot of these applications. And I started Overclock Labs to take Kubernetes to market. So this is before anyone heard of Kubernetes, right? This is like, there's different stories about like Overclock Labs. They're like, oh, Overclock Labs bets on Kubernetes, and like, we think Kubernetes is going to win the game because everything else is junk. And it's the same wars you see here, Solana and whatnot, right? But the problem with Kubernetes was it was very single cluster and not multi-cluster. So I helped orchestrate a multi-cluster Kubernetes where you could deploy Kubernetes in essentially any cluster. And the reason for that was we wanted to, in order to achieve high performance cloud, we need to go to the edge, in the sense to remove latency between the device and the server, because it's just physics. That's how you get speed, right? There's nothing you can do. You can't go faster than light. Light means you got to reduce distance and so on and so forth. We and doing a multi-site Kubernetes was very hard because at scale you needed coordination. You need a coordination means you require a single server that's going to coordinate the edges. And more often than not, at scale, everything breaks. So if the coordinating server breaks, you end up with deadlocks. So you end up with just dead nodes, right? So you want a peer-to-peer coordination mechanism as an effective coordination mechanism. So when you put a peer-to-peer systems, that means all the nodes self-organize. What happens is bootstrapping becomes a challenge. How do you get node membership to another nodes to the cluster? So bootstrapping becomes a problem. So initially we had a BitTorrent style replication and a Merkle tree style integrity check. If you put BitTorrent in a Merkle tree, you end up with a blockchain. Accidentally, we did blockchain. We didn't intend to do a blockchain. And then bootstrapping credentials was problematic. So we wanted permissionless writes. That way, you can have self membership to the cluster. So we did permissionless Merkle trees and BitTorrent. You end up with a blockchain. That's how we discovered blockchain. 2016, we wrote the first version in Ethereum Frontier. This is when Bitcoin was an amazing blockchain. Ethereum just started introducing. They introduced the notion of at least deterministic programming, and we are non-deterministic. So we had to rewire our understanding of how to do determinism. And Ethereum broke, and we were like, well, this is not going to work out. CryptoKitties launched, and that was the first NFT game. And then we did Joe Kwan, who's the founder of Tendermint, who's the founder of Cosmos, he emailed. We got introduced somehow, and it was very attractive because of the library format that we could essentially adopt and start. So we didn't really start as a crypto thing. We started as a distributed systems, as Kubernetes at the edge, and we're the first ones to do so.
Right.
And when I was invited to speak at the first KubeCon and whatnot, so I come from that world, and this was a solution to a problem that we had. And long story short, crypto came. The tokens, I really didn't understand the token in the beginning, but then we looked at all the other systems that we had before. My friend from Docker, Sebastian, and we were having a lot of Docker. If you look at it, right, incredible software, but terrible company because they were trying to use an old business model to achieve modern open source distribution. That didn't quite fit well. Crypto came and essentially made me realize crypto is an incredible sustainability mechanism for open source. So all that just came together, and ideas upon ideas and ideas upon ideas. We're still building those ideas. I think we're still I'm fascinated by looking at a lot of these new structures, societal structures we have today.
Okay, so it's evident that you saw the value of some tech and some ideas much before others did in this field. And so what are some moments since you started Akash where you were that kind of reaffirmed your belief in this is the right way to go, or this is exactly what builders need right now, or that kind of reaffirmed your belief in just the mission of Akash?
So we knew, because as an open source developer, right, it was very important for us to stay open source. Right? I grew up in India. I learned how to code and all the stuff because of open source software, right?
Yeah.
And open source fundamentally, if you look at any widely adopted technology, it's always open source. You may start off with closed source as a way to get started, but any sufficiently successful technology, be it internet, be it browser, be it operating systems, they eventually become open source. Like Linux is the most widely used. Apple is not. Apple is beautiful, but it's not most widely used operating system. Apple iPhone is our most widely used phone, because Android. Look at any sufficiently important technology is always open source. Why? Because the network effects open source has is significantly larger than closed source software. Because why you have participants? You have people that take a piece of software and improve upon it and make it their own. The sense of ownership you get with open source is very important for something like cloud to be open source.
Yeah.
And if you consider cloud to be the most important layer of our society, and Gartner had recently published a study that said about 5% of global GDP will be spent on AI compute, right, by 2030, and that's believable because it's massively important. AI is going to change, right? AI really is dominating the importance of the cloud in everyday lives. So if you think of this incredibly important technology, and if you tell me that's going to be gatekept by a bunch of shareholders or board members of this unknown, unelected, members of our society, that's something I don't want to raise my daughter in. Right. That's a world I don't want my daughter to grow up in.
Yeah.
So it is too important for this technology to be open source, and it's too important for it to outlive me, my company, and everyone that worked on this technology at the beginning. So if we look at what structures that can make this open source sustainable, it's crypto. It's very hard to find any other business models or structures, or forget business models, any model, as a matter of fact, right, that could work well, that can outlive a lot of our companies and our existence, right? So when I understood that, and made me realize that this mission is too important, and you take a much longer term view, it's not cycles, it's not bull or bear, whatever that is. When you take such a long term view, it becomes very, very obvious that open source is the way to go, and a lot of like I say, right, with closed source you can go fast, with open source you can go far.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's a great
pick
way
your
to put
horse,
it.
right? If you want to go fast, do closed source. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's going to eventually. The problem with closed source software is once you know you're making money, you're not going to change because you have shareholders to protect. It's illegal, in fact, to to take away shareholder value.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have fiduciary duty towards increasing your shareholder value. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a closed source company. Just be that. But if you want stakeholders, if you want people, if you want society, if you want to build a public utility, it has to be open source. And I reject any closed source ideas in crypto.
Okay. So kind of in terms of that, right? Like this mission that you're, this open source mission, and like the importance of computing or importance of cloud. Like, where would you say, like if you just had to put a percentage to like how far you've gotten into achieving that journey with Akash, what would you say that number is, and why? And maybe even like in 5 to 10 years, like what is your optimal vision for how users are going to be using Akash or interacting with the network?
So I would say there are two primary phases of Akash, right? The master plan, the two parts of the master plan. The first part is pre-parity and post-parity, parity to the cloud.
Okay.
So Akash as it stands now is not as capable as an Amazon in terms of just features. Like, okay, look at Amazon. You go to Amazon not for compute, you go to Amazon for services, managed services. So you go there, you of course can get compute, but you get databases, you get a lot of services that you can pay a premium, but takes away the pain and the friction to manage them. So that's very advantageous for people, right? Akash is not there yet. So for us to even we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
But I would say that we have the most important aspects of Akash, the primitives we call it, in terms of resources, right? So next big thing is obviously automation. We have managed services that are very, very important. You come to Akash and you're like, I want a database, you should get a database. Managed by ideally the authors themselves that wrote the packages, right? So there's another huge problem with open source monetization, especially for people that write open source software that are not interested in creating companies, but they want to keep writing the software, and there's really no way for them to sustain their operation. See that as a problem, so I want to solve it. I want to solve open source authorship, right? And we've solved that in music we've solved that in other roles, but we haven't solved sustainability for open source authors. So that is pre-parity. And post-parity is when we achieve all capabilities that current cloud has.
Okay.
What would a world look like then, right? I would say it's very hard to imagine what the benefits of a cloud that exists in 10,000 regions and a cloud that's sitting in your home, ideally in your PlayStation. When your PlayStation is not being used, it should contribute to the compute to the cloud. When your car that's charging is not being used, a self-driving vehicle has about 200 GPUs. Why not? Why not use those GPUs? Why not create a more sustainable world where you're leveraging existing infrastructure, right? What would I call that? Innovation beyond imagination. So you imagine a world where you have all these access to all these incredible resources. Like as an edge computing programmer, having access to 10,000 devices gives me opportunities that I can't even fathom with the current world, because current cloud doesn't give me those capabilities.
Right.
What'll happen if I can get so much computation power that goes beyond what a current old cloud or traditional cloud could look like? I can't imagine those possibilities, right? And that too in an open source manner. What does that look like? It's phenomenal. Open source is internet is such a crazy organism, right? Open source is internet's code, right? So when brilliant people come together and look at an open source software and they think about what's possible, it's just beyond what I can sit and imagine. So I'll be humble in my prediction that I don't know what the world will look like, but what I do know is it's something that we can't sit here and imagine and talk about. But I have some ideas of what that would look like, but it'll be fun.
So, like the terms like compute or cloud, like they're terms that aren't like commonly known. Like people don't really understand what that means, even though they interact with it basically every day, right? So how do you explain to like someone that doesn't know, like maybe family or friends, the significance of something like compute or cloud?
My wife doesn't understand what I do. I picked her for that. I just say, like, look, all our lives reside in the cloud. They know that because they know iCloud. When I say cloud, they think iCloud. They're like, oh, all my photos are in iCloud. I'm like, no, your entire life is on iCloud. And I'd be like, what'll happen if that goes away? They'd be like, oh my God. So then they get then it becomes a reality. Because a lot of people take cloud for granted without realizing cloud is just another computer sitting somewhere else.
Right.
Secured by a bunch of bash scripts. Really, that's what it is. When I explain to them, my job is to make sure that you don't lose your data, make sure that you can own your data, make sure that you will never be canceled, you can never go away because you have a different political opinion than the people that operate the cloud. And then it becomes a lot more easier and a lot more simple. And be like, how do you make money? Well, that's different part. Then let me explain crypto. It's a whole different animal. But I think it becomes easy when you say like, look, you pay $10 to Netflix, $5 goes to is a tax you pay.
Right.
Who do you pay the tax to? Because everybody understands taxes. Like, well, there's this thing called the cloud companies. Like, what are these companies? Well, they're just, lords, the digital lords that collect taxes from you without you electing those lords are, because they have been chosen, by the few. Then it becomes a lot more easier and a lot more obvious as to why this layer needs to be decentralized.
Right. And so, in terms of like these big cloud companies, right? Do you, to you, what would be an indicator of, I guess, like reaching their level, or like reaching the level to where you know that, Akash, like this network can outperform a big cloud company?
For me, it's about, at this stage, it's about the stories. Right? It's about, there was an article recently in Semaphore. Semaphore is a very, very prominent magazine. They interviewed a bunch of people from Columbia, a bunch of AI scientists from UT as well, I think. And one of the students said, well, he was a machine learning student. He wanted to get compute on Amazon, couldn't get compute on Amazon, found Akash, could get an A100 for $1.10. And that student wouldn't be able to do what they need to do, and that's our next generation, right? And that's the kind of stuff that I know, looking at it, this is the kind of stuff the next generation, having them get access to the cloud, and Akash being the first one.
Right.
I saw another story the other day on Twitter somewhere where this kid in Africa, never experienced cloud, self-taught programmer, and doesn't have a credit card because there's a significant portion of the world doesn't have credit cards. Right? We take credit cards for granted being the West, but a lot of people in the world don't have credit cards. Right? All have this weird systems in China with their own payment mechanisms. Right. It's just very fragmented, and couldn't really deploy on Amazon or any of the big clouds. And somebody sent him a bunch of tokens, and he was able to deploy. Right. So that's the kind of stuff that I know there's a billion people out there. Right? When I look at these stories, now I see a lot of machine learning companies, real prominent companies actually now using Akash, right? You'll be suing, you see a lot of tweets me talking about these companies. A lot of them just don't get what they need on Amazon. That's when you know that you won already. And that's the kind of stuff that you take on and you grab. And well, you can compare numbers and revenues and whatnot, but ultimately those are just tail metrics, not leading metrics. I look at leading metrics and leading data. That is the impact we make daily on people's lives, be it the kid in Africa, be it the kid in Colombia, be it the machine learning company that raised $10 million, couldn't get access to the compute on Amazon they need. These are kind of impact stories that indicate that we're going in the right direction for me.
That's amazing. Definitely seeing like the use cases is, and like seeing it in action is probably another level of like satisfaction. A final question, I guess like more of a fun one. If you weren't working on Akash right now, what would you be doing? And two-parted question, like what would you be doing in crypto, and then just like in general as well, like maybe working on some other tech-related thing. I don't know.
I'm professionally trained in bioinformatics and biomedical engineering.
Okay.
I have a minor in artificial intelligence and from 2014.
Wow.
Sorry, my apologies. Graduated in 2004. No one was hiring for AI in 2004 or bioinformatics.
Yeah.
I would do something with AI and bioinformatics.
Wow,
I would
okay.
do, that's definitely been a passion. Healthcare and AI has been a passion for me
Yeah.
for a long time. So I would definitely do, there's so much opportunity there to solve so many problems in the world, right?
Agreed.
Like be it, AI can accelerate research to a point that we don't really realize how fast you can do. I mean, AI for me is about improving productivity, right? Like if you chat GPT, it's not about cheating, it's really about getting A to B faster.
Yeah.
Like if you're a doctor, if you can see 10 patients a day, you can see 100 patients a day because your diagnosis is much faster. So things of that
Right.
nature really excite me. I'll be working on so many different things that AI I think is I'm kind of getting a FOMO with AI because there's so many things happening so quickly. I mean, when I was doing AI, it was very different, right? I mean, the concepts exist like reinforcement learning and whatnot, but the pace at which AI was moving now was it's nowhere near, right?
Yeah.
Like, when back then. So
Wow.
I am getting a lot of FOMO with AI, but that's what I would be working on if I was not working on Akash. But Akash is a lifelong endeavor, and I don't know if there's a retirement here, but it's one of those things that is going to outlive me, right? So
That's thank you so much. That was a great answer, and we're probably gonna wrap up now. But thank you so much for joining us today, and yeah, thank you guys for tuning in.
amazing. Thank you so much.